Jesus, I trust in you. I trust in you. I trust in you, oh Jesus.
All right, Father Brown, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you along. So the first thing I guess is to just tell everybody, why you're here. One of the things that we try to do, one of the problems that we have to solve with the men's conference is make sure that we're properly funded, we're making good use of our resources, and so and we need help from the community. And I reached out to all the schools and alumni associations to see, if we could get some of this help. And you jumped in right away with both feet. So we're really grateful for the support of Jesuit. You guys are serving along with the Knights of Columbus as one of our event sponsors for the men's conference is really, is a huge help. So first, thank you for that help. And the first question is, why? Like, why is Jesuit investing in something like the men's conference? Why does that seem like something important to you? What are you hoping to realize from that?
Yeah, well, every morning whenever I wake up, I think about the mission of Jesuit High School, right? And to put it very succinctly, I would say that we're here to form men of faith and men for others. And I don't believe that this should be a one-shot deal, right? I don't think it's like, hey, we get them for this period, we get these young men for this period of time, and then we're done with our mission. I mean, we're motivated by that mission to do that work, and I think that the men's conference is just one of those things out there that does this very, very well. And it made me think, at least, that this was an opportunity to support something that was both local, but the greater New Orleans area local in that sense. So it really does affect our young guys when our young guys are at Jesuit High School or around us at Jesuit. I feel very confident that we are promoting all the right things. They're learning all the right things. They're being formed as men of faith and men for others. But they do go out into the world, and a lot of their time is spent outside of the confines of Jesuit High School, outside of that bubble. And I want them to be around saints. I want them to be around good men who are good role models, who are doing it right. And so to me, it doesn't, this isn't just something extra for us. This is really a center of what we do. I recognize all the time that the culture that we live in it presents an uphill battle for the young guys at Jesuit. And a part of that uphill battle sometimes even includes the families that our young guys go home to. And so we can light a young man on fire, get him all excited, and he still shows up in confession and says, "Sorry, Father, I missed Mass. My parents didn't take me." And I'm like, man, how can I get people just to be a little bit more enthusiastic about God, about the faith, about being good men, especially.
Yeah. That's right. I one of the things that I've thought a lot about is that we have the wider culture, which we know is as you say, is an uphill battle, which is a charitable way to put it. It's very difficult. But then there's also the culture within the church, and I think for a long time we've kind of put all of our eggs in the schools and youth ministry, and with the idea that if we can teach the faith to young people, then they'll do what they're supposed to do for the rest of their life. Sure. And in the environment, and that carried us for a good long while, but in the environment right now, it seems like even if you go to a great Catholic high school and you have a good Catholic education coming up,
that's right.
You get picked off by the culture as you go forward, and you find yourself aimless and lost. And even this idea that this attitude that faith or religion or Christianity or Catholicism is really for kids, and it's not an adult, mature a way to live your life. And so, that's one thing I'd just kind of like to talk with you about is how do you think about that question about what can you do in, say, a high school, but what are the limitations of that, and what else is needed, as guys go forward into taking on, a fully adult, fully responsible life in the world and in the church?
Yeah. I mean, just real quick about the limitations. There's a sense of, in a high school, especially in an all boys high school, but I think it's everywhere, there's a sense that we often teach by competition, right? So we set these guys up to do their very best, to try hard. Hopefully, you'll win. You know, you'll get to raise up the trophy in the end, and that produces a lot of trophies, right? That does. It's a good, it's a
Yeah.
good way to get young guys, I guess, to be able to build up in
Motivated.
themselves,
Yeah.
motivated and talented and skillful, and we often talk about a Jesuit, the sort of competence, conscience, and compassion that you need to be the kind of man of faith and man for others that God made you to be, right? So that's a big piece of it. But when you go out into the world, often competition is not the primary way. Competition may get you to sharpen your skills, but applying those skills for young guys before they really have every skill that they need, just the opportunity to apply those skills in the world are limited, right? So, I think about our young guys. We get them fired up sometimes, and I'm preaching this fervorino to our eighth graders, about how they have to get out there and work hard to be that man that God made them to be, and they don't even have a driver's license yet, right? So they can't.
Yeah.
There's a they can't even go to the place where they're going to get their service hours without the help of an adult somehow, right? So there
Yeah.
are some limitations that way. I do know that when I talk to grown men, and I've heard this many times over, when I talk to grown men, they often say that there was a moment when their first child was very small and they looked at their child in the crib, and this deep, deep moment of grace hits them where they say, I knew at that moment what I was made for. Like
Yeah.
all of the hardworking hours I put in at work, all of the education I had gotten in college, all of these different things that I'd done, it all made sense at that moment when I saw that kid's well-being is my purpose in life. Well, when when a young guy in high school is making his way through life, sometimes those big purpose-driven life moments, they can be
Yeah.
limited as well, right? So young guys often think my purpose in life is to talk to Susie Q on the phone, and it's like it means everything to me right now, or
Right.
my purpose in life is to not miss this free throw. It means everything right now, and I don't
Right.
want to take away from the importance of those parts of their lives, but there is a switch that happens between
Yeah.
childhood and adulthood.
Well, the way I kind of been thinking about that very issue is, there's lots of things that you brought up that I've been thinking about. Like, one is, we are purpose driven, men in particular, spiritually, we are purpose driven. It's necessary that we have a goal, that we feel like we're winning, that we are advancing, that things are getting better. And when we lose that goal, or when they lose a sense that it's impossible for us to get there, we become discouraged, and then we become
Right.
despairing,
That's right.
and we throw up our hands. We become jaded, and these are like really spiritually really dangerous things that happen to us as adult men. But at the same time, you don't come out of high school and then you're the CEO of the company. Like, you don't win those games. And sometimes I think, and so then you have to, a lot of times you have to be willing to scrub the toilets, and you have to be willing to, get, play a servant role, and play a role where you are cooperating with others for the sake of a goal that we're all trying to achieve. Like, say you get a job in a business, you're going to start at the
Mhm.
bottom, and you're going to work your way through. But then there's another question about the baby. You're holding your child in your arms, and
Mhm.
the game changes. Like,
Yeah.
what counts as winning here?
Right. That's right.
And I think sometimes young people, in the office of marriage and family life, in high school, you just don't yet have a sense of what it feels like to bear responsibility for others, really. I mean, you have friends, but like life and death responsibility for somebody else is just not part of their experience yet. you
Mhm.
know
Mhm.
and so, like, how do I win, how do I advance this game
Right.
of caring for this child, caring for this family, caring for this wife? It's one thing to look for the date with Susie Q. It's a whole other thing to like manage a marriage,
Yeah.
or to build that. And so yeah, I think that's one of the issues that we find. And I wonder if that's something that we maybe could do better, is helping guys understand, what game we're actually really playing here.
I absolutely think so, right? And it's often why maybe the saints you look up to in your childhood sometimes change as you become older, right? I know a lot of men who really, first of all, their relationship with the Virgin Mary changes, right? There's a
Yeah.
different kind of relationship there, but also in Saint Joseph, that they begin to see the role that Saint Joseph plays and how his vocation plays itself out becomes something they can relate to and look to Saint Joseph not just for inspiration, but also for strength, from strength and for prayers from Saint Joseph. They want those prayers.
Yeah.
That can change with adulthood. With
Yeah.
adulthood,
You did a video for us a couple of years ago, that one year where we
mhm,
couldn't do the conference because of COVID and everything,
that's
and we
right.
did
Yeah.
that video series, and you did a great little video for us, which I'm really grateful. It's still on for those of you guys that are listening. It's still on the NOLACatholicMen.com website. If you go to the past conferences, you can see Father Brown's
Which is
talk
really
there.
really a great resource that men can still return back to conferences of the past and still gain some fruit from that. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been really good things. So what are the things from your perspective, like getting out of the high school for a minute and just thinking about, you know, what do so you deal with a lot of adults naturally, you're
Sure,
talking with
sure.
parents, you're talking with,
Hmm.
other stakeholders in the school, and you're not exclusively just talking to high schoolers,
That's
and
right.
so you're seeing the struggles and difficulties that people that are bearing responsibility in the life of the church are facing.
Hmm.
What are some things that, from your perspective, that the church needs to be providing, or things that that men in particular need from the life of the church to help them progress in their spiritual life?
Yeah, so I think it boils down to, if you talk about everything that people deal with, when we talk about an uphill battle, or we talk about a culture which can sometimes be hostile to the faith, in what way, right? Part of it is obviously there are some temptations that are readily available for us to indulge in. There are all these kind of things, but I believe that underneath all of that, we are, not to sound dark, but we are facing a crisis of meaning, right? That we
Yeah.
have lost our sense of meaning in the world, which is really a necessary component to everything else flourishing, right? This crisis of meaning, and especially a crisis for meaning in terms of masculinity, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes if you talk about this too much, you talk about it too much, right? But it's the kind of thing that if we just take it for granted, we're presented with this picture of, like, this false dichotomy of every man falls into one of two categories. It's either the wimp or the barbarian, right? You are. It's like you're either this kind of
Right.
strange version of a feminist, which, kind of thing, or this other kind, the kind of man that doesn't care whether he's on the baseball field or in a business meeting. He's just sort of walking in and dominating everything, and he doesn't know the rules of the game in different places, and what different talents he needs to bring to bear. It's only force. It's pure force that he needs to bring
Yeah.
to the table. And those two images, I think, are both very unhealthy, unchristian, all those kind of things.
And both
So
shallow in their own way,
yeah,
right?
very,
Yeah.
very shallow, and
Yeah.
and part of the problem, part of the crisis, is that they do help a lot towards a sense of tribalism, of belonging somehow, right? So, like, to give the label of my, I know I label myself I label myself as a feminist. Now I'm fighting for a cause or whatever, and it's still
Yeah.
shallow. But all of a sudden, you're going to find that you belong in that crowd of people, of like-minded people. Or,
Yeah.
hey man, I don't care. I won't drink Bud Light. I won't do. Like, I have my list of things that I will not have my man card revoked by this other behavior. And so
Right.
so now I will belong to those kind of people. And like, as soon as you find your group, your tribe, that is not centered on Christ, you're going to find yourself in trouble, right? I think you're
Yeah.
going to find yourself deeply, personally unhappy, which is a terrible consequence and everything. But you're also going to be bad for the world, right? You
Yeah.
will also be not bad for the world, bad for your family, bad for the city of New Orleans. You're not
Yeah.
going to be part of the solution. And there's only one solution, and that's Jesus Christ. So finding yourself, finding your meaning in life, finding your way of, and I don't just mean purpose in life, which is as important as that is. I mean, when you look at the world, what patterns do you see? And by patterns, I mean, like, you have a one version and then smaller versions of the same thing. So I think, for example, the way that God relates to his people ought to, we ought to conceive of that as the same way that a family is supposed to relate within itself, right? So,
Yeah, right.
and when we
It's
say that,
mirrored. It's like
yeah,
it's like an instance of the
mhm.
larger pattern.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So if you see,
Yeah.
you see a tree, and that tree has branches. If you cut off a branch and you look at the branch by itself, it should look like another tree,
Yeah.
right? And if
Yeah.
you take a smaller branch off of that and look at it, it's going to look like another tree, you know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way that life is supposed to work. So insofar as we know God to be a forgiving God, we ought to find forgiveness within our own families. Like God has
Yeah.
invited us into Himself by inviting us into a world that looks a lot like the way God relates to us. We're
Yeah.
supposed to relate to one another the same way, right?
You know,
Uh,
it's what's super interesting about that is when you go back to those more shallow, flat versions of masculinity that, that we put on like a coat, or, and we try to play, a lot of times those are actually related, if we really think about it, related to different shallow conceptions of who God is. If God is the
Absolutely.
all-powerful master who can do whatever he wants, and it's because I said, the world is because I said so,
Hmm.
well, then that's how I'm going to act in the world. I'm going to make things be the way I say they're going to be, and I'm
Hmm.
not going to take any BS from anybody else,
That's right.
because
That's right.
I'm going to be an instance of the all powerful who can do what he wants and nobody can tell him what to do, or
Yeah,
if you have
without a
this
doubt.
idea of that, God is this loving, compassionate, always merciful without any sense of justice or whatever, then you'll have this, you know, uh, overly open, never any demand kind of direction. And so it's funny. It's like you always have a conception of God going
Hmm.
on.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
a matter of whether or not that's examined or not. Like,
Yeah.
how good is your
That,
conception of God,
that's
and then
right.
how that conception of God actually
Yeah.
expresses itself in your way of life.
That's right. And here's the thing: like if you go to an hour of adoration, right, and there's and the priest is there and he's leading adoration. He's got lots of incense going on. You got smoke everywhere, all that kind of stuff. 1 hour in adoration, you go home and you can still smell the incense on your clothes, right? So like it kind of
Yeah.
sticks to you for a while, and then it fades away, but it does stick to you for a while. But same thing happens if you go to Bourbon Street, right? You go home
Yeah.
and you smell a certain way,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
You're going to carry that. You're going to carry that smell with you, right? So
Yeah.
that there is a sense like the world is affecting us in the way that we think about God, and the way that we think about God does affect us. And there's this interchange, there's this exchange of smells, right? That kind of goes
Yeah.
with it. And
Yeah.
so
I love that.
our
It's so
yeah,
true.
our vision, I guess, our understanding, like we're talking about the crisis of meaning, our understanding of that tree, and then the smaller branches, and then the smaller branches, our the way we get that tree and those patterns of God's manifestation in the world, God's incarnation into the world, is going to affect so much of everything else. And so currently our sense is that things like status and image and all that kind of stuff, I think
Mhm.
there's a spike in that, I believe, because the world we live in has the internet with Instagram and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And so not only do we have it, but also like the fiercest arguments happen on Facebook, right? I will
Yeah.
I will unfriend someone using Facebook, like I will
Yeah.
do, I will,
Yeah.
those kind of things. That has, I guess I entered into adulthood just as the internet was becoming a thing, right? So I'm 49 years old right now, so you kind of do the math and figure out. But a lot of young guys who are fathers right now grew up in a world that had the internet from the beginning, right? Had
Yeah.
this virtual world with a different set of rules for interacting with people, with a set of temptations that are on the one hand as old as time, but also like in your face,
Yeah.
and it with just this unfettered access to tons and
Yeah.
tons and
Yeah.
tons of it, which can really, really form our concept of ourselves, our concept of God, our concept of the world around us. And in the end, we're left with, I think, I call it a crisis of meaning, that we don't
Yeah.
know what all this means anymore. And so if you're going to find meaning in your life, if you're going to be able to sort of like, meaning really is what branch of the tree you can place the world, the elements of the world into, you categorize, you understand the world through meaning. And when you
Yeah.
understand it, that allows you to then to be and to act in the world in a way that God intended from the beginning. I
Yeah.
don't want to make this sound Gnostic, as if like knowledge is all you need, but it's a piece of what you need. And so
Yeah.
that crisis of meaning is a thing I pay a lot of attention to, and I see in adults they were unprepared for what they faced when they got to adulthood, and now they're
Yeah.
trying to catch up, and I understand why.
You know, to make what I think you're saying, it's all I find myself too. Like I've been thinking a lot about this idea of the crisis of meaning, and also struggle to figure out how to explain what that is in a way that people can understand, and it's difficult, but
it's like a fish explaining water, like
that's right.
We're living in
Well,
it,
but one of the things that helps is for us has been like getting involved more seriously in more difficult areas of life in the church. So like, for example, in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, I just did a post recently. Every Monday morning we have this Substack post that goes out, so you should subscribe to the Substack post, NOLACatholicMen.com.
Okay.
It's at NOLA Catholic Men at Substack. You can go there.
Okay.
Anyway, and when we're dealing with, for example, people who are struggling with infertility, in their, which is a huge suffering. That's a big cross that a lot of families, married couples, it's not just a women's issue, it's, and a lot of times with issues like that, or also things like pornography and sexual integrity kind of work, we're accustomed to sort of treating those things in a moral tone. So like, this is what's morally okay. This is what's not morally okay. This is what the church teaches is licit means to deal with infertility. This is an illicit means.
Right.
And, so bioethics and, all of those kinds of things. And there's a rich tradition in the church. And without questioning all of that, the person who's struggling with, say, infertility, the thing that they're bearing isn't, what should I morally do? In fact, a lot of times when people say, well, have you tried adoption, or have you tried natural family planning, or have you, they've already done all of that homework. I mean, they live in that. It's not like they didn't have any ideas. But the question is, what does this mean? What does it mean that we're unable to have children? What does that mean about our marriage? What does that mean about our bodies? What does that mean about, is God punishing me? Like, what's the meaning of the world? Like, what's the significance of this?
Right.
And
right.
It's not a moral, it's a, the moral lays on top of Christianity is more about the meaning, and the moral tradition flows from that understanding of the meaning.
It's very unfortunate, but it is a tendency within humanity to say, show me where the guardrails are, and the more I know about the guardrails, the better off I'll be. I mean, it manifests itself at Jesuit High School when a young man comes in and says, "What's the lowest grade I can make and still make an A?" Right? It's like show me where the boundaries are, and then I'll be good, right? And as long as I don't get outside of the boundaries of what I've set my goals on, I'll be good, right? Instead of saying, what can I do? Of all the good choices I have, ignore the bad choices. Let's leave those out. Of all the good choices I have, what is the best choice? Like, which one glorifies God the most? What does it mean to glorify God? And which one of my choices that I have before me glorify God the most, right? And this is the whole slogan of Jesuit High School and the Jesuit Order in general, of ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God, is that you're choosing between a bunch of ways that you could glorify God. You're choosing the one that glorifies God the most, And that does not ignore at all the sort of theological, moral tradition of the rules, and it doesn't ignore that at all. In fact, that's a necessary component to the problem. But it just doesn't let it stop there. It doesn't let it stop with, here are the guidelines. As long as I act within the guidelines, I'll be fine. It says, I want to be everything that God has made me to be, and I want to glorify God the most that I can.
Yeah, I mean, what's really beautiful about that work is that when people walk, and one of the things that came out of that was this little phrase that we've been using a lot, that the cross is a fruitful tree. Like, if you carry the cross well, it bears fruit. And so what happens is, it's an intense, difficult time and suffering, and it goes on for a long time. But when that's carried well, what happens is these families, these women, these men, they come to understand and appreciate much more deeply what it really means to be married, what it really means for a marriage to be fruitful, that the love of a husband and a wife together is so rich that it's capable of having children, and it's a mistake to think that the children exhausts what it means to be, what marriage is supposed to be in the world. That a husband and wife who love each other and care for each other, that bears fruit in a way to care for the world, whether it's through prayer, through acts of service, through just the richness of their life, through hospitality. You see it like bearing fruit in these like incredibly beautiful marriages that are capable of caring for and caring for other people spiritually, materially, all these other ways. And it teaches us what those of us who do have children, like what it really means to be a mother, what it really means to be a father, what it really means to be responsible. That kid isn't yours. It's really important.
Right.
It's a real temptation for people who have children to think that their children,
Sure.
like those children belong to me. And like, no, they don't.
Or that
Like-
they're just there to complete a picture. I expect my picture to be that I have I've got a hunting camp in Pass Christian, and I have a house in Uptown, and that's what I've always wanted. That might include X number of children, and that's what I've always
and
wanted.
they all at mass sitting in a row, all wearing the same.
I figured out, like, I know what I wanted. I've known what I've wanted since I was 22, and I've sort of planned out my life, not giving any room for that plan to change with your own maturity. That you begin to as you go through hardships and struggles and victories and everything in between, that God might find some ways in there to change that that plan that you think you're following. God might find ways to say, hey, I'll call you to something maybe different, something you didn't expect.
Yeah, what happens, I think you would agree with this, and tell me if this makes sense to you, but when we're talking about a crisis of meaning, and you're making choices about what would be best and for the glory of God, and sometimes we, especially think as a part of American culture, we have this idea of being a self-made man, or this idea that I can create my own identity, which goes way off the rails with transgenderism and all that.
Right.
But even just
Right.
in the normal case of things, if I don't achieve a certain level of status or a certain level of income or a certain number of children, then I haven't fulfilled, and that's what I want, and I'm going to work towards that thing. It's still this idea that who you are and what your identity is something that you've created, as opposed to something that you discovered. Like you have to
that's right.
discover this, and so you're like,
That's right.
what kind of a person am I that I can make creative decisions, that I can think differently about it and maybe do something different? And then you're in this realm of vocation. A vocation is something to be discovered and not necessarily
I mean,
built.
pair that thought up with I create my identity. I create, pair that thought up with the idea that maybe identity is just what people slap onto a label something with, right? So back to the whole I belong to this tribe or that tribe. It becomes very easy. If I get the right tattoos, I will fit in great with this
Right.
crowd. If I wear the right stuff, I'll fit in great with that crowd. If I get the right number of followers on Instagram because my life is the way that it is, or if I have the right taxidermied animal on my wall, and it's coming from a guy who loves to hunt and fish. That I get it all, right? Like I see where that comes from, but it's a bad combination. It can really lead to a lot of unhappiness and ultimately a lot of brokenness that isn't good for you, isn't good for the people that you love, isn't good for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I suppose it makes sense when you're young. You're an adolescent, and this question of meaning is bubbling up for the first time. Maybe, and you look to others to find out, well, what kind of a person am I? Who am I? Am I a Jesuit boy, or am I a Rummel guy, or am
Right,
I or whatever, and you're looking to others for what jersey you should be wearing, or what tribe do I belong to? And, am I a jock, or am I a nerd, or am I a whatever, all of those kinds of things. And so we get important cues from other people that help me to understand. But like, think about also like what cues you get from your own father. If your father says, I love you, I'm proud of you, or you're a loser, like that makes a big difference. Like other people are reflecting back to me and helping me discover my identity. But at a certain point, as we become like fully mature and adult men, we have to develop our sense of our own, we have to discover our sense of identity and realize that that's all of that. The things that we get from other people are low resolution. That's a good way to put it, right?
Right.
It's not,
That's right.
they're only seeing parts of me, just like I only see
Yeah.
parts of the people. I don't see the
That's
whole
right.
person that's before me. I only see a part of them.
Yeah.
But the whole reality is more complex than
Yeah.
that. And that's where like a life of prayer really, for example, not just saying your prayers, ticking your box, but like,
Sure.
you know, really walking before God, you know, so God's the one who sees you all the way through
Mhm.
and who can help you to understand who you are
Yeah.
so that you can figure out what can be done
That's right.
next.
You know,
You
a
know?
couple of things about what you just said. First, if your identity is an identity in Christ, and we
Yeah.
know that to this very day, people don't understand Christ, then our own sense of identity might being in a little bit of mystery there isn't a bad thing, right? So like
Yeah.
having my identity all worked out and having my tribe that I belong to all worked out, knowing exactly, these kind of things and knowing the rules of all that, having mastered that might help you in society. But listen, Jesus Christ had a pretty rough go of it, right, in his day. And so our
Yeah.
identity in Christ, we ought to have some expectations that we will be misunderstood, and that
Yeah.
ought to be something that we should be able to be
Even by ourselves, even by ourselves.
we
Yeah.
ought to be tough enough to be able to weather those storms
Yeah.
of figuring things out. But then number two, I would say that, to bring it back to an analogy of a young man in a high school, is as he knows, okay, if I'm going to step out onto that basketball court, that wrestling mat, that football field, if I'm going to step out into those situations, I had better have been prepared beforehand. Right. So I
Yeah.
better have done the right exercises. I better have learned the rules of the game. I better have listened to a coach who knows more than me
Who
and
knows what he's talking
and
about?
will
Right.
continue to instruct me. I better have teammates that I'm ready to just go through a wall with, all that kind of stuff. That preparation does not happen just by itself. Right. So I believe that part of the crisis of meaning and the crisis of of saying that identity is just this sort of image and a shallow image out there in the world, is that
Yeah.
we forget that in our adult life too, we really have to do exercises to make ourselves in the spiritual life, spiritual exercises that make ourselves into what God meant for us to be, right? That help form us into that. And it's allowing God the space to do that kind of work. So it's not like I'm going to do it all myself and make it all myself. We're going to cooperate with God's grace in such a way that we are ultimately more free to do what
Yeah.
God wants us to do, right? To cooperate with God's grace, but to make an effort to cooperate with God's grace, to be more free for what God made us to do. And that's going to boil down to the things that I expose myself to, right? Like the kind of information that I'm able to deal with, like all of that stuff that comes in from the movies I watch, the music I listen to, the kind of people I hang out with, the kind of work that I'm involved in. All of those things are a big chunk of the picture. Number two is how I process that information, right? You have some people who take dramatically different lessons away from the same experience. You think of suffering. Some people walk away mad at God. Some people walk away feeling closer to God than ever.
Right.
So you have the experiences, and then you have how you manage those experiences, like how you think of them. This is your intellect that has to be applied. Like you've got to reflect on those experiences. Think about what has been happening in your life. Take the time to think about what God has been doing in your life. And then number three, build up the will to be able to carry out the conclusions that you draw, right?
Yeah.
So, fasting, prayer, a good practicing of the faith, being strong, being diligent, building up that strength to be able to say yes when God calls you to very, very hard things. When you've got your memories, the experiences, your memories, the intellect and the will, all in God's hands, right? You will be free. You will be free. You'll be the kind of man that can do what God made you to do. You're going to be free enough to be able to discern God's will for your life and carry it out. I believe that comes as a result of real, serious spiritual exercises. And I think that the men's conference is part of that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's what you're describing there is becoming a man of integrity, to integrate these aspects so that they're
Right.
all going in the same direction,
That's right.
and that's an exercise to do that, to integrate, not only what I want to do, but my ability to do and my sense of what's actually good, all of that integrated together.
That's
I think about something like, and it also occurred to me, like when you, just to put a little point on one thing, for example, you know, the stuff that you watch, like what movies you're going to watch or something. And you know, again, you can shift that into a moralistic tone, like if it has curse words in it, I'm not going to watch
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Or
Sure.
if
Sure.
it, you know, which,
Yeah.
you know, and fair enough, right? I mean, that gets you a certain, you
Yeah.
know, way
Yeah.
down the road.
Yeah.
But you know, when you're talking about meaning, like you can look for something that's a film that is beautiful or moving or insightful, even if it has, you know, difficult things in it, like life is difficult and complicated. And
Mhm.
but when you start to recognize, you know, what about that movie was beautiful and moving, or what about that movie was distasteful to me,
Yeah.
and
Even
why?
right, exactly. Even in
You know,
contradiction, even in contradiction to the intentions of the artist, I can
yeah,
still take in certain art and say that I gained something from it that the artist not only didn't intend, but maybe doesn't even like, and I still walk
yeah.
away
And
with,
that requires having a certain spiritual
yeah,
insight that comes from experience, from past you know, so
that's right,
your life of
that's right.
prayer, so that you can like, what is it that God wants me to know about
Hmm.
reality
Hmm.
that's being expressed through this
Yeah,
film or something.
that's
And
right.
that's a more discerning approach um to like media than just like these rules, you know. And I think that's one of the things. There's a lot of complaints about how bad Christian movies are oftentimes,
Hmm.
you know, because you're trying to meet a certain like moral standard, but it lacks a connection with reality, or lacks a connection with beauty. And I think as
Yeah,
Catholics, we have a much more, you know, richer sense of
yeah,
how beauty and art and things like that can
sure.
actually strengthen our life together, our spiritual
Amen to
life.
that. Amen to that. A lot of times, that whatever God wants you to do, He wants you to do it well. Like, I guarantee you,
Yeah,
He doesn't want you to go out there and create something that is corny. It doesn't want you to,
yeah, right,
doesn't
right, right.
doesn't
Not
want you to.
moving, not
Right,
rich,
right, right.
not beautiful. Yeah,
Whatever it is God wants you to do, it's going to that your soul ought to magnify the Lord. I always think of that. What a great image that is of
yeah,
what does it mean to magnify something else? It's like you
yeah,
look at that magnifying glass, you can see right through it into the thing you're looking at, but you see it even better because of that magnifying glass. It improves your
yeah,
vision to look at
yeah.
something through a magnifying glass. That's kind of
That's what
what we're called to be and do.
that's what fasting does.
Yeah,
Interestingly,
yeah.
you know, you know, sometimes we is another dichotomy here. Is like sometimes we think, you know, we should fast because the world is evil or something, and that we're not made for this world. We're made for the supernatural, and so, you know, as much as we can escape from the pleasures of the world or whatever. And then, you know, and then there's all kinds of problems there that I know that you're aware of. But, you know, one of the things that I found, and it's actually been very helpful for me in terms of like incorporating fasting or whatever, is that, you know, when you're hungry, like you're hungry when you're fasting,
Right.
and you want to eat food, right?
Hmm.
Um and you remind yourself, you know, man does not live on bread alone. Like
Hmm.
there's a deeper bread, there's a real, you know, that
Hmm.
the word of God and the truths of who God is um are more sustaining to me than even, you know, food. But then what happens is that it's always the case, especially in Catholic understanding, is that fasts get broken and you feast, you know.
Right.
And when you sit down and you eat, you
Yeah.
know, you sit down to a nice steak, you know,
Hmm.
and you eat it and you go, thank God, right? You know, like,
Right.
because like
Glory to
God
God.
made that steak, right? You know, and
Yeah.
that steak becomes a manifestation of God's grace. It
Hmm.
becomes and it becomes little s sacramental. Like it's God speaking to me of his good. He's caring for me, he's
Yeah.
providing for me, he's sustaining me, he's nourishing me.
Hmm.
And I can see that. And so the food that I eat becomes more transparent to the good God who is communicating himself to me through those good things of the
Yeah.
world. And so
That's right.
I can understand who my wife is, and I can understand who my kids are, and I can understand what a steak really is. And that crisis of meaning is being untangled,
Yeah.
because it means something to be able to eat. It means something to be able to live in a household with people who love and care for you. It means something to be a
Yeah.
man of responsibility and of integrity. And then I have purpose, and I'm participating and cooperating in a way
Hmm. And
that makes the world better.
yeah, and the to understand that, right? To understand exactly what you just said maps on to the seasons that God created the world. The earth that we live on goes through seasons, right? Why
Yeah.
did God do that to us, right? Why did God make a world like that? Well,
Right.
it's for every point you just made explains why we have seasons, and it explains why we have liturgical seasons. Like, why do we celebrate Mardi Gras before we celebrate Ash Wednesday, if you want to call that a celebration, before we
Right.
observe Ash Wednesday? And why do we not mix those two on the same day? Like, why are we not getting ashes on Tuesday? Why are we not parading around on Ash Wednesday? Right? There's
Yep.
a real, like, when you recognize that in the world, you'll recognize why every once in a while New Orleans gets a foot of snow. You'll understand why for most of the months we live with this sweltering heat. You'll look at the world differently. That's the crisis of meaning will be solved, right? If you really get all the points you just made about fasting, apply in so many different ways to other things, that now you smell like incense and a little bit less like Bourbon Street. Right now you have a part of who you are is getting infected by the things of the world, because our God is a God who is not far away, who has not created the world and then stepped way back. Our God is a God who lives in this world. We believe in a God for whom the incarnation is how he loves, right? That's how God loves us, is through the incarnation. So don't be surprised to find God's way, God's nature, God's very being permeating through all kinds of things in this world that we might otherwise think of as mundane and secular. There's no such thing as secular. There's no such thing as something apart from our recognition of the God that we love,
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to that idea that I had mentioned before, is that, the truth is that we all are walking around with a conception of God. You can't get rid of that, and then it makes all the differences if that idea of God that I have is the real God, or I come to discover the real God, then everything becomes richer and more beautiful. And that, one of the criticisms of the men's conference, it's not really criticism, it's just a limitation, is that it's just one day. Like, we always do it. It's always that first week of Lent. So it's always the Saturday of the first whole week of Lent. So not the Saturday after Mardi Gras, but the Saturday after that. And, and we pick that time. It's a really inconvenient time in terms of, like, pastorally, what's going on, in the world. But we pick that because that's the time where we set things aside and we kind of like, okay, what discipline am I going to take on? What, what is God calling me to do next? And so, everyone in the room is sort of in that place together where we're all kind of considering, what does God want us to do for this next year? But it's you can't just have like one single mountaintop experience and then expect that. I mean, occasionally, extraordinarily, your whole life changes from one moment. But even in those extraordinary cases, there has to be a daily walk. There's more that needs to be untangled, and more that has to be worked through, and more that has to be discovered. And so there needs to be sort of an ongoing, but at the diocese level of the church, we're not equipped for that, So what's needed is men in parishes and even below the parish level in groups to accompany one another, work with one another, stick with each other, help keep the flame alive. It's not like, oh, I went to Jesuit high school, 20 years ago, so I know everything I need to know about what God wants. It's like, no, you got it. It doesn't stop,
exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So how are you guys at Jesuit thinking about that ongoing, that need for ongoing, growth in the spiritual? I mean, it must be a difficult thing. I know it is in a high school. It's a difficult thing to instill that in young people, that, like, okay, when you graduate here, this doesn't mean it stops. Like, your spiritual life has to continue forward.
Well, I mean, you're looking at the result of that that being a concern of ours, right? This is us trying to support something like the men's conference, right? This is something like us trying to support what the archdiocese does, what church, of course, I spend a lot of time at Jesuit High School. That is my main mission and everything. But also, I'm going out into the parishes and doing work, in places where I'm going to run into a lot of people who are not Blue Jays, right? And for the record, by the way, I graduated from Eunice High, so I'm not a Blue Jay myself. I'm from St. Landry Parish. Like this is way out there, right? So I certainly did not grow up with the benefit of having that moment where suddenly I'm crowned good enough, to have graduated from Jesuit. Right? This is
Right.
So it's obviously every day is a struggle, and I know that it is for Blue Jays, right? So at Jesuit High School, we have quarterly evenings of reflection where we get somebody to come in and give a talk to those who come. It's all free. We want people to come in. We do everything from make our chapel open and available to alumni who might not be as strongly connected to a parish. Let's say it's a young guy who wants to get his baby baptized, but he's living in Houston, but his family is all from here. So when he comes back into town, he might want to have his baby baptized in our small chapel or something like that to kind of revivify that connection that he had to his faith and all that. And so Jesuit tries to play a part that way. I have a little YouTube channel that I try to post my homilies on. Where we are always concerned with exactly the thing that you're talking about. And when we send our guys off, they know that they don't already have everything they need. That's why they're going to college. Our fingers are crossed. We're all over here praying that when he gets to college, he at least has what he needs to be able to weather that storm, which is its own kind of. So I'm talking about coming back smelling like Bourbon Street. College can be that way for a lot of young men. So we do our very best to always welcome people back and to think of themselves and to identify with their connection to Jesuit High School, not only because, hey, we want to see more people wearing blue and white everywhere, which is true. But what we really want is we want people wearing blue and white because they know what it stands for and they still believe it, right?
Yeah.
They know what we're all about. And so for us, I guess, getting the message out about what we really are. We are not, we're not just a trophy we took home or the scoreboard, whatever the scoreboard said, or we're not, how many students we enrolled this year. There's this living sense that, hey, when you're done with Jesuit, think about going to a retreat at Manresa out in Convent, Louisiana. Think about doing that maybe once a year. Think about how when you go to your parish every Sunday, being a lectern or an usher or something like that. Think about your vocation in terms of even down to the woman you're going to marry, that you ask yourself, is this person that I'm going to marry make me a better person? We try to train these guys for moments that they haven't yet encountered, certainly while they're here. So we try to something that in a lot of ways we talked about the tree with the branches and the branches on the branches, a lot like what you see in a family. Jesuit High School tries to pull in some of those very same aspects too of how you're going to be formed and then relate to the others around you.
Yeah. So last thing I want to talk about. Thank you for that. I mean, that's super helpful. One thing that I definitely want to talk about is, New Orleans. The Catholic Church in New Orleans is unique. I mean, I've worked in other dioceses before, and the high school rivalry thing, the Catholic high school rivalry thing in New Orleans is something else.
That's right.
Like
That's right.
I wasn't from here. My wife was from here, so I had to be introduced to this. And this idea that when someone says, where did you go to school, they mean
where'd you go to high school?
And and one of the things is, sometimes that, and I think you mentioned it way at the beginning, sometimes this idea of, competition,
it is good and holy for young men to engage in competition and become stronger. It is really weird to see adults hate one another because of where they went to high school. I find that to be distasteful and ultimately bad,
Yeah.
So,
but there's a way in which, there's this idea that when you have friendly opposition, like friendly opposition, like, you're married and your wife doesn't let you have dumb ideas. Like, she's the one that's going to tell you that you're dumb, and if you don't have that, you don't know that you're dumb, like if you don't. And so there's a way in which within the life of the Catholic Church, we can have these differences, and we can have these differences of focus, differences of emphasis, different approaches to spirituality, different approaches to education, and you fight as hard as you can for what to be true, but what to be true is limited, necessarily, and that you don't encompass everything. And so, one of the things that we're trying to do, like one of the things that we're doing with the men's conference, is that we're publishing the parishes that are sending the most guys to the conference. And part of that is to, like, having your brothers, like, I'm going, our parish is going to send more than the neighboring parish. That sense of competition, as long as it aims towards all of our good, can be helpful.
That's right.
Right? Like, we're all being successful together by kind of pushing and cajoling each other towards the good. But when it becomes competition for the sake of competition, it, like,
we ought to be
us.
we ought to be inspired by the good that others do, right? So we ought to look at someone who's outdoing me and say, man, I am inspired to work harder myself, or to do things differently myself, whatever that is, right? So taking inspiration from other people's success is a very good thing. Being jealous of their success and feeling like it's a zero-sum game, that's for high school kids, right? That's for that's which is great. It's great. State championships, all this kind of stuff. That's all great. But in the end, I think there's a different thing that happens in your adulthood, that you recognize that the real team that you are on is centered around Jesus Christ, and that's a unifying thing in a way that we ought to be, in the end, proud of our actions. And I think that that's a good thing to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, I think that's right. Like, it's another one of those, the branches in the tree. Like, we need integrity within ourselves. We also need integrity within the Catholic community, which includes all of these different parts that sort of are in tension with each other. But if like, that's why that's part of the reason for the men's conference is we get everybody in the room. This is not the Jesuit high school men's conference, or whatever. It's like, we want everybody there so that we can be a witness to within the fruitfulness that comes from all of those different parts.
That's right. And I often remind the young guys at Jesuit, I said, look, when we go into, let's say, an athletic competition, right? God does not care who wins this athletic competition. However, our Blessed Mother does, so we better go out there and win. Our Blessed Mother loves us the best. Don't let her down.
Yeah, right. Well, Father Brown, thank you so much. How can people reach you? You want to talk about your YouTube channel and
if you search for me on YouTube, search for me on YouTube, you'll probably find me. I have. Just a whole lot of real short reflections that way. Of course, keep your eye on Jesuit High School's website if you want to see some of the other things that we offer.
Yeah. Well, hey, Father Brown, thank you so much. I'm very grateful for the time and for the support of the men's conference, and for, it's good to have friends who are rooting for us and trying to help us to be successful. And we're real grateful. Great. So thank you. Thank you for the time and for everything that you're doing.
Awesome. God's blessings on everything y'all do.
All right. Take care.